Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever and whenever you're listening to this. Welcome to the Bitaxe Townhall. Today we're writing the 12th edition of it, so we are quite far into this session here, and it's lovely to be your host. It's lovely to be here. Let's do a quick mic check. Please write something in the chat, just as usual, if you can hear me or not. And let me quickly invite McFighter onto the stage, because we do have a couple interesting topics today that we need to talk about. First of all, welcome McFighter.
Hello, thanks.
Hey, lovely to have you here. So, for everybody listening to this here, today we have a couple of topics. First of all, we need definitely to talk about the Bitaxe hacks, and we have McFighter here with us, who is basically in charge of the design of the Bitaxe hacks. And after that, we want to talk a little bit about the firmware, because lately we do have a couple of news on what's going on, a couple of bug fixes and stuff like this. As usual, you do see on my YouTube channel a couple of update videos about those firmware releases that we do have, but sometimes it's good to talk about what's going on in the background and just to talk a little bit more in the deep dive about what's going on with it. And lastly, maybe something new, but more on that later on. So, McFighter, lovely to have you here on stage. Lovely to be able to talk to you about the Bitaxe hacks. Would you love to share with us what is the current state? What's your plan? How much time do you currently have to actually work on this? Because some people are probably a little bit nervous about what's with the progress, what's going on. Is there even anything going on? Yeah, tell us.
Okay, so I understand a lot of people are anxious to get this board done. I have been making some progress on version 304. There were a number of issues listed in the Git repo that I've been working my way through.
Probably some minor issues in the background on his side, so let's just ignore that. All right, he will probably be back.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay. So I'm working through the issues that are listed on the Git repo, and I expect to have them all wrapped up here within the next few days, probably 2 to 3 days. I'll finish up with all the revisions for version 304, and at that point, I assume Ben will manufacture one or two so that we can validate the design. Once they're manufactured and tested, I'm hoping this will be the release candidate. I'm pushing hard to get everything wrapped up so that we can call it released, at least this first version. So that's where I'm at right now.
All right, I mean, that sounds lovely. That sounds good. Would you love to share with us a little bit of the insight of what kind of optimizations do we actually need for the version 3 or 4?
So there were a few bug fixes, but one of the new features that I've added is a voltage sensing for each of the individual voltage domains, and that will allow debugging a lot easier, because you'll be able to look in the GUI and see what voltage you have inside each of the domains.
Oh, that's lovely.
I'm trying to add a few things that will make it easier for people to debug these boards, because they are a little bit complicated to understand. I'm also going to add some drawings on the silk screen that will show the outline of each of the voltage domains, and also identify some key test points for people who are building these, that they can measure some of these key test points and determine any faults that are going on. If they're having problems with the board running, they'll be able to measure these test points and report them on the Discord channel, and we can try to help people get these boards working.
Oh, that's good to hear. So speaking about those changes from 303 to 304, I mean, we do know the complexity of the Bitaxe hacks is way higher compared to the Bitaxe in general, especially with having multiple ASIC chips on one board. So some people might have asked themselves, what if I only want to start with one ASIC chip on the board? Would this function, or if not, why not?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people would like to go slowly and install one ASIC at a time and test it as they go. But unfortunately, the hex board doesn't work that way. Each voltage domain is dependent on the other voltage domain to provide voltage in series. So without all the ASICs installed, you don't get correct core voltage for each ASIC. So it's necessary to install all 6 ASICs before testing in order for the board to even function properly.
So this would mean that if I did anything wrong with the soldering on my end, I could potentially fry up these ASICs, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate, but I mean, it gets harder with more ASICs, right?
Yeah, and the ASICs are fairly resistant to voltage for short periods of time. So if you have a soldering fault and you power it up, as long as you have a heatsink on it, chances are good you're not going to fry anything. But you just never know. Depends on how bad your fault is.
I mean, speaking about that, I'm currently looking at the issues that are open for the Bitaxe hacks, and I do see the issue 23, which suggests of adding an eFuse. So this is probably a lovely thing to add for all these German engineers that are listening to this later on. That would love to have a fuse on the Bitaxe board. What's going on with this? Are we actually adding a fuse on the Bitaxe hacks in order to not fry too much?
So the eFuse, the main purpose of the eFuse is actually to measure the overall current on the board, because as you know, right now when we measure the current, we're reading it digitally from the voltage regulator, and we're only getting the amount of current that goes into the ASICs and not the rest of the board. The eFuse will allow us to measure the overall current of the board and calculate the power consumption of the entire system. But along with that, we would be able to set a current limit on the eFuse, which would prevent it from going too high. But something like that is not going to protect your ASICs, because your ASICs are really running at 1.2 volts.
Mm-hmm.
And if your voltage domains are out of balance, you can get as much as 3.6 volts across the ASIC without blowing the eFuse. So
it's an interesting take. So, I mean, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So actually adding the eFuse is a little bit complicated, and it's kind of an open issue at this point. We're still deciding if we're going to do that or not on version 304. But like I said, the amount of protection you get from the eFuse is somewhat limited. But it is a peace of mind thing to have that eFuse on the overall system. So it's kind of we haven't decided for sure if we're going to include that or not.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you already spoke about a thing of the eFuse and the measuring of all these voltage domains. So currently with the version 303, if we do take a look on the power used by the board, we don't actually get the actual use drawn from the power wall or from the wall. Is anything in the making with 304 so that we actually get a proper reading of the power that we use on the board, or do we actually need to measure this on ourselves?
So that's the purpose of the eFuse. If we do add the eFuse, we would be able to measure the overall power of the board and go off of that rather than just the regulator power. So if we don't add the eFuse, you are just going to get overall power, you'll have to measure it at the wall.
Yeah, that's a good one, I'd say. I mean, sure, there are a couple more complex topics to discuss if we want to add an eFuse or not, but I mean, just in a short side, it would be an improvement, I'd say, right?
Yes.
Just for the user experience, not intentionally for the board itself, but probably for the user experience. Also, I'm currently looking in the chat. Calster was writing, this means when one ASIC chip is in fault, this could burn the other ones. Short answer is yes, but maybe you
yes,
want
it's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible, but when I was building these up initially, I saw voltage domain imbalances, and it did not hurt my ASICs. But I really don't have a good feel for how much it takes to burn up one of these ASICs. I've seen voltages as high as 3.6 volts on the ASIC, and after fixing the fault, it still works fine. So I guess I've never actually burned up an ASIC, so I don't know how hard it is.
That's interesting. So let's see, Kalsu's writing another question probably. Do we have anything else that we need to talk about? I mean, I do see that we have a couple of open issues about
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we can run down through these issues really quickly. Let me look at the ones that I've added for 304. The voltage, the temperature sensors were in a really tiny chip package, really difficult to solder. So I changed those to a larger package. It's a lot easier to hand solder, and Ben really wanted something that was easier to solder as well. So I updated that. The ASIC footprint had too much solder paste, I think, in the mask. I copied the footprint over from the Bitaxe Ultra so that it's consistent with what we've been using on the Ultra. I changed the voltage supply for the op amps that supply the communication level translation. And it was due to a conversation in the Discord channel that explained that we can power them through 5 volts rather than internal domain voltages. And so the op amps are getting powered through straight 5 volts now.
What was it before to do? Maybe dive a little bit into this.
It was using the internal domain voltage.
Mm-hmm.
It would use the domain ground reference, and then for the negative voltage, it would pull from the domain below it. So it was all relative to the domain voltages. But it turns out you can power those op amps through a board level 0 to 5 volts, and they still work fine.
Was the previous edition? What was the previous one causing any issues?
I didn't see any issues, but if you add up the numbers, we were just barely out of spec on the supply voltage for the highest domain.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to get that voltage within the spec that comes from the op amp manufacturer. So just to make sure there's no trouble down the road.
I see.
One issue that's a work in progress right now is I'm changing the power connector. I removed the screw terminals and I'm adding an XT30 connector. I think this will make it a lot easier for people to build cables and plug into it. And also, those who are manufacturing these for people, they'll end up with a connector on the outside that people can just plug into instead of having to mess with the screw terminals.
So for those of you who might not know what an XT30 connector is, this is from these, usually you do see these on RC planes or RC cars, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of batteries that come with XT30 connectors. They're these yellow 2-pin connectors that are they have lots of friction. They hold on really tight. They're pretty nice.
What about these pins that we use in one of the previous versions of the Bitaxe, on the Bitaxe Max, and one of the early versions of the Ultra? Because I do know, for example, the Bitaxe Hex, the 3 version that Tiny Chip Hub is producing, they do use these old connectors where you just pin in your cable and then to whatever cable you want to plug in there.
I'm not sure I understand what that is.
I'm not sure if there's any specific naming for these ones, but on the Bitaxe Max and the first version of the Ultra, I believe the 2.1, we used these pinouts.
I know what you're talking about. It's called a spade lug, a spade terminal.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that, but I've always wanted to use an XT30 on one of these because I have lots of batteries and cables that I've built over the years through some radio control hobby stuff that I have. And Ben was on board with the XT30 for his manufacturing, so we decided to just go with it.
This brings immediately up to my mind that I can just use my 12-volt battery pack and plug it in and on the go mining in the sub or wherever.
Yes.
I mean, that's lovely to hear. All right. So
another thing, I guess this was added in 303, but we're carrying it over to 304, is the BAP port, the Bitaxe accessory port. And which is kind of related to another project that I've been working on with Ben, which is the color display. So I created the color display board that connects to the BAP port, and Ben has kind of teased a little bit with pictures on the Discord channel where he's been playing around with it. So I designed the board, Ben manufactured one, and he's been working on some firmware. And ultimately, we're going to have a color display similar to the Nerd Miner that's going to show all the status, and it'll be compatible with the Bitaxe Ultra and the Supra, and compatible with the Bitaxe Hex as well.
It's fine. I'm not sure how much you are willing to share about this, and I'm not sure if Ben is even willing to share about this. I mean, he told us already that this display will feature its own ESP32, right?
Yes.
But it will be powered over the BAP port, right?
Yes.
WIP? What does this
mean? It means work in progress.
All right.
So yeah, and maybe Ben doesn't want to talk about it too much at this point, but just suffice it to say that we have a color display that's in the works, and it's coming. It's going to be fantastic.
It's awesome. I mean, it's probably one of these eye catches that people want to have on their desks sitting around and then just showing to the wives or children or whatever, to the grandparents probably, and telling them, yeah, yes. I'm mining here at home, mate. It's lovely to see, and to know that you guys are working on this in the background.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a picture in the chat.
So running down through the list of features, I don't see anything else significant.
I mean, that's all right. So we do know that in the next couple of days you are really looking forward for the 304 version to be released, and then we'll see how Ben turns them out on the production line, right?
Yeah.
So I'd say it's just a matter of time, probably 1 or maximum 2 weeks of saying, yeah, this will be the release candidate or not, right?
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yeah, once they're built and we validate the design, I'm hoping that we'll be able to mark it as an official release.
It's going to be awesome. I mean, sure, there's a little bit of work to do on the, I'd say, explanation side, so that the people understand that the actual efficiency that they do see on the dashboard is not the correct one. But maybe we will find some sort of a workaround, maybe an increase of these values by a certain percentage. Because so far, from what I have seen with these two hexes that I do have, one is a prototype of that Ben built for me, and the other one is from Tiny Chip Hub. And both of them, they do tend to be like from the power consumption they do show me in the dashboard, it's off by like 10 to 17 watts. So the efficiency is way too good to be true.
Yeah, it would be nice to be able to measure the overall board power with that eFuse. We have a very limited amount of space to squeeze that in, so it could be a challenge, but I'm going to look into it and see what I can do.
Yeah. I mean, why not, right? So let's see. I quickly need to take a look on the videos that Ben is posting here. Yeah, it's just this short video of the OLED screen. Lovely. Alrighty, do we have any questions from the audience? Do you want to know anything specific about the Bitaxe hacks? Now is your time to shine and to ask any questions. And even though if you have a question about any other topic, just feel free to ask them in the chat. This town hall is always for you guys, so that you can come in and join, just listen, or ask any questions that you do have. So I'm looking forward. What do we have here? Culster wrote about the web interface. Is it possible to protect with power access on IR? On it, probably. With password access. All right. So we spoke about this. It's an interesting topic. I believe in the last or in one of the previous town halls we spoke with Scott about it, and this is kind of a feature that we don't really see a benefit for the overall community in it. Some people opened up an issue on the GitHub and said, yeah, it might be beneficial for the overall use of it if you are, let's say, for example, on a public Wi-Fi and you want to protect your Bitaxe. Sure, this could make sense, but the occasion of running your Bitaxe on an open Wi-Fi is quite rare, I'd say. And some other argued that they do have any siblings or something like that maybe want to make some sort of a hiccup and change the BTC address. And some other people argued this is a potential risk to the overall interface. But these argues, I'd say, are not really worth digging into the section of creating a password for the Bitaxe. I mean, sure, for one, you should never mine on the public Wi-Fi. And for all these other argues, I'd say if you do have any issues in your local Wi-Fi, then fix them instead of blaming the Bitaxe. That's my take on it. What do you think about it, McFighter?
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said. You should not be mining on a public Wi-Fi for sure. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's not that much to say. Sure, maybe somewhere in the future, I'll see a couple other people ask about what is with HTTPS and stuff like this. It gets way too much complicated adding HTTPS to something like a Bitaxe, and there's not really any benefit to it. Yeah, go ahead.
So Ben just added in the chat that Stratum is clear text. So the communication between the Bitaxe and the mining pool, it's all clear text. It can be intercepted and hacked and modified. So the password protection really, I guess, would just be there to protect the configuration of the device itself. And if you're on a private Wi-Fi, that should not be an issue.
Correct. And also that Stratum is clear text explains why certain other things are currently not working. For example, this is out of the territory of the Bitaxe hacks, but we've been working on the implementation of public pool for other node versions, or not node versions, but for these all-in-one node solutions that you can build, like Umbrel, Raspberry Blades, Start 9, and so on. And most of you probably know, on Umbrel you already can, with one click, install public pool and run your node at home. I myself am doing this, or you just have your own bare-bone Linux device where you run Bitcoin Core and then point your pool to it. But with other things like Start 9, which focuses heavily on the security, also internally on your local network, which is kind of weird. but they don't allow, for example, HTTP plain text over their node devices. So implementing public pool is at the moment just not possible, which is weird and a bummer. But they said, at least I've read it somewhere, that the developers of Start9 said that they are implementing a feature to allow HTTP on the local network. We'll see. Alrighty, let's see. Chilling Bee is something writing in the chat. So from the Bitaxe hacks, I mean, yeah, sure, it's lovely to hear. It's good to hear that the progress is almost done, or the work is almost done, and the progress has been good. Were there any major issues that you'd like to share, or anything that was where you were scratching your head all the time because it wasn't really working?
Not really. I mean, there's normal challenges with bringing up a board and getting everything working, but once everything is assembled properly and soldered down properly, the board just works. Last night, I followed Ben's lead, and I took one of my hex enclosures and installed 2 hex boards into it, facing each other with the heat sinks interleaving each other, and hooked them all up in a single box and powered them up and ran them, and they were both hashing. I was getting 5.5 terahash with the 2 of them combined, and with a single fan on the end of the box, and they were staying. The temperatures were staying reasonable. They were staying cool. The air was coming out of the box was warm, but it was certainly not excessive. So with a single 80 millimeter fan, I'm able to keep 2 of these cool in a single box. So that was kind of cool.
Oh, that's really cool to hear. Especially speaking about this box, this is some ordinary general box that we probably found somewhere on AliExpress, right?
Yeah, this is the one that's listed in the Git repo. There's a link to it on AliExpress. You can buy these.
Do you know if there's any work in progress about any other enclosure? Because for one Bitaxe, it's kind of too big, right? A little bit, not that much. It fits perfect, the fan, but you do have plenty of space in it left so that you can actually add a second hex in it.
Yeah. I'm gonna leave the enclosure up to the mechanical guys to design. I'll stick with the electronics.
That's awesome to hear. I mean, you're doing a great job. I really appreciate it, and I really need to thank you for doing all the work that you're doing there. It's lovely to have you here.
Oh yeah, it's a fun project.
All right, we're seeing a question from Chilling Bee. Is it or may it be possible to run the Bitaxe without the ASIC working? Do you mean without the ASIC soldered on, or do you mean like without the ASIC actually doing any work? Because for both of these, I do have an answer for you. So you can definitely run a Bitaxe without the ASIC installed, so without it soldered on. And also, when we do the self-test, the initial self-test that you do with the Bitaxe on the most recent firmware, it is actually running a quick test of calculating a couple hashes that are hard-coded into the software. And after that, it just stops working. But if I'm not mistaken about this, it is possible to make them stop. But for some reason, they just keep upcycling on the last job they did, if I'm not mistaken. But please correct me if I'm wrong about that.
So I've not messed around with the self-test myself, so I'm not familiar with how it works. I think Ben probably understands it more than I do.
Yeah, this was not specific about the self-test, but this was my understanding of the ASIC, how it functions, because I've talked about this in one of the previous town halls as well, that the ASIC is sometimes behaving a little bit weird or unexpected, I'd say. Not really that it is doing anything that it should not doing, but for instance, what we do have for the Bitaxe is, if you do have one Bitaxe right in front of you, just turn it around and take a look on the back side. In the upper side of the board, you will find a tiny IC that's labeled as Q4, which is been used in order to power on and power off the voltage domain of the Bitaxe. So one feature of the Bitaxe is whenever mining is not possible or something is wrong, it just turns off the voltage domain to the ASIC, and therefore it's not running. So that's probably an answer to this question.
Oh, so yeah, that's a good point. So on the hex, the voltage regulator that powers the ASICs is controlled digitally over the I2C port.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be possible for the firmware to go in and turn off the voltage regulator and then run its own self-test. That's a good point. I don't think that's possible on the Bitaxe Ultra, but with the hex, you have total control over that voltage regulator. So the self-test could certainly be modified to do this on the hex. Just turn off the voltage regulator and then run a test on all the other pieces with the ASICs turned off. That's a good idea.
We should probably write this down somewhere, right? Alrighty.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you have anything else that you want to share about the Bitaxe? Or maybe we do see one or two more questions about it. Otherwise, I'd like to maybe invite Ben onto the stage because we want to talk a little bit about the firmware and the current releases. Maybe he is willing or interested. Let's see. So I'm quickly waiting. Ben is writing something in chat. Probably he's working and he can't. Yeah. Okay. All right. We got you. No worries. So, in general, about the Bitaxe, let me switch over to the appropriate GitHub repo. There we go. So we're currently sitting at the version 2.1.6 of the firmware release from the Bitaxe in general, the ESP-miner. And by the way, there are currently two different versions. So we do have the regular one, which is working for the Bitaxe Ultra, the Bitaxe Max, and the Supra. And then we do have a branch which is specifically for the Hex V302. I think in the next version, or in some of these next versions, the regular firmware should also work for the Hex, right? If I'm not mistaken, already in the code is a little bit for the Hex.
Yeah, so the firmware could use a little bit of work. There's a tag for version 302, which has kind of been our working branch right now. There's also a branch named just Hex, and that is an old stale leftover from way early on in the project. I think before I even started. So my plan is to blow away that Hex branch and take over with some new firmware. So rather than naming the tag after the board firmware, the board revision number, we're just going to have a single branch called Hex that people can grab the firmware from.
So in the end, it will be that we do have two different firmware releases, one for the Hex and one for all the other boards.
Yes, at the moment, that's we're kind of stuck with that for now. It would be a separate task to unify the two versions into one unified firmware, which it definitely needs to be done at some point. It's a separate firmware task that needs to be done.
Yeah, you should argue that it is a little bit of bloatware if you do add in the Hex for the Ultra firmware, maybe, because you're bloating up the firmware version for the old boards, which is kind of unnecessary, I'd say. But it could make sense in the future to just have one firmware. Maybe, as you said, a little bit of work would be needed to do that.
So I think it would make sense to restructure the firmware slightly so that there's some common code that runs the same on all boards, and then there's some dedicated code that's hardware dependent, and you could build it and it would only include the hardware dependent code for the board that you're building for. But that's a big structural change in the firmware, something that needs to be talked about in the future.
All right. So yeah, we were talking about the firmware in general, And most of you have probably seen that we're sitting at 2.16, and some of you might face a couple of issues with these firmware versions that we currently do have. Ben is certainly sure that he figured out what the issue was, and it's quite funny. I mean, as you know, or probably know, we are writing all the firmware in some sort of a framework which is called ESP IDF, which is specific for programming and ESP. And funny enough, ESP IDF has plenty of different versions itself, and it seems to be that with the versions we used to work, it was causing some sort of a hiccup that whenever you build the firmware, it could or sometimes would cause the Bitaxe to actually reboot without any specific reasoning. It was not to any improper coding or stuff like this. It was actually just the case of using the wrong compiler to actually create the firmware, which is totally hilarious, to be honest. Yeah, that's probably just the take about the firmware. I mean, we do see version 2.16 does have a little bit of a change log, just a fix for the overflow bug with real-time logs. So these real-time logs, they do get drawn directly from the ESP buffer. And at some point, it could be that the buffer is just overflowing because it's trying to load too much data and it's not deleting the old data in this buffer. This is nerdy and tech stuff, but yeah, it's good that it has been fixed in the version 2.16, and I'm looking forward for the version 2.17, because we really need to work on the issue that we find with the ESP IDF. Not really sure if we will release a specific new release for this, or if you just change the factory files on the version 2.16, but I'll definitely update you on that. Alrighty. What else do we have? Let's see.
So in the chat, Chilling Bee just pointed out that it's possible to update your hex board through the AXOS firmware update, and that's very bad because it will load the wrong firmware into your hex board and then it'll stop working. So there's definitely some firmware work that needs to be done. I'm going to try to tackle some of this as soon as the hardware is finalized and see how far I can get. I'm not a great GUI programmer, but I can do low-level drivers, and maybe there's some stuff I can do here to help out with the firmware.
Yeah, maybe we need to reconsider how we want to distribute these versions, because currently we do have the ESP-minor, and it only has like one release page, so it's kind of hard to differentiate between the usual firmware and the hex firmware. And I do get it. Most of the people that love these Bitaxe projects, or the project and the device in general, they are not really that much into the tech section and maybe don't really understand all these differences. But in the end, the best idea would be to just go into the Discord and ask for a little bit of help if you're unsure about it before you break anything. But speaking about breaking anything, you pointed out that it is actually possible to update the hex firmware, or from the hex GUI, the wrong firmware. Would this cause anything to break on the hex? I'd say no, but maybe you have a different opinion on that.
Yeah, I don't think it would break anything. Because your voltage regulator that powers the ASICs would just not get configured and not turn on, most likely. But yeah, the documentation certainly needs some love. After the hardware is finalized, I think I'm going to tackle some of that, go into the Git repo, and modify some of the readmes, and provide some more instructions for people who are jumping in this project and they don't know which direction to go. We could definitely add some more documentation and be better about that.
Yeah, there are plenty of processes that need to be rethinked or reworked. I mean, as well with the OSMU wiki that I'm writing on, it's really a mess at some point, or sometimes even just hard to keep up with what's changing and what's new and what to add where. And plenty of people don't even know that we do have the OSMU wiki. And if you don't know, guys, just check out the website is called osmu.wiki. Basically, you can find there anything about everything here in the OSMU community. I'm trying my best to keep up, but if you do feel like something is missing, you can always add new stuff to it. And I also made a video about this in the Bitaxe 101 series. So if you want to know how you can actually contribute to anything on GitHub, just check them out, because I explained it how this works. And it will help out the broader community. So I highly encourage everybody of you, maybe do that. Just even if you just want to write a new text about something that has been implemented or changed, or you think like one text sounds like shit because I'm not native English, that's also lovely, because please correct me if I did anything wrong. Alrighty, I only have one more topic to go over, and yeah, let's see. So for those of you who might know, we do have the Bitaxe, we have the Bitaxe hacks and all other derivatives of the Bitaxe, and it's lovely to have them. And we also have this lovely feature called Swarm. But what we don't really have is any sort of actual combined hash rate display. And that's something I'm working on. It's called the BitHub, and the channel recently got reactivated because Thursday was kind of weird for me. I realized it's a holiday here in Germany, at least in the section where I'm living, and I was completely blown away and thought I have nothing to do with my life. So I reactivated some of my dead brain cells and quickly, did a little bit of a deep dive into the code of what I was thinking would be needed to actually create something like this. And I do have a prototype here running next to me, which is basically doing some cool stuff. So what I do have in my mind is you have some sort of a little display sitting on a desk, and for this display, maybe if you want to take a look on AliExpress, there is a weather display. It's an ESP display. It's called Geek Weather Clock or something like this. Totally weird, and the firmware on it is nothing that I'm interested in it. But they do use an ST7736 display, which is just a small I2C display, I believe. And I was thinking about, it would be cool to have something like this, which is really, really tiny and just a lovely OLED screen sitting on your desk and just showing you the combined hash rate of everything that you do have in your local network. And what I did is I created a firmware which is also running on the ESP IDF framework, which is basically doing just that, what I explained. So it is scanning all the time your local network. It is doing a whole network scan every 5 minutes at the moment. Maybe I increased this to 10 minutes. And it's scanning for all these devices. And if it finds a Bitaxe device with a specific JSON response, it actually stores these values, then combines all the hash rate and displays this currently on a small I2C display that I do have here, the SSD 1306 display. It's not that beautiful and you cannot really display that much on it. But with the Geek Weather Clock display, which does have way more pixels and way better drivers than the SSD 1306, I do hope that I can create something that is appealing to the eye to actually be on your desk and just show you the combined hash rate. Maybe I do add something in there as, I don't know, like what's the current firmware release version tag, and are your devices up to date? Do you need to update them? Maybe some sort of a notification system on there, something like, hey, you jerk, update your miner. I don't know. Maybe I will add something like that into it. But yeah, that's a project I'm currently working on, as well as all these other projects that are floating around here that needs some love and treatment. I just wanted to quickly share this with you. Maybe you do have something that you want to ask about it. I don't know. All right, Alex Royce wrote, super cool hash rate display idea prototype. I wonder if there's a block lock integration possible in long term. I'm not really sure. What do you mean about block lock integration? A block clock integration. I mean, sure, that's super easy. I mean, I could just pull from any server, from a mempool or somewhere else, the current block height and add it in there. The display that I do have here is, let me quickly measure it, 28 by 28 millimeters. So there's plenty of room. I'm not sure about the pixel density of these weather station thingies here, but from what I've seen, the original firmware on these ESP 8266, I believe, are in there currently. I ordered myself one with an ESP32 version. They do have quite nice graphics on it. So from the original firmware, you do see like a sun, then you see your local time, you see your weather forecast, and funny enough, it's probably some of these Chinese thingies. In the bottom right corner, they added in some anime characters that is dancing all the time. A little bit distracting, but I think you probably get the point. So it's definitely possible to add in more things. As I said, currently with the prototype that I do have here next to me, it's just to actually figure out if it is possible to get all the JSON response from the RP, because the Bitaxe devices, all of them, they do have an RP which I just call, then I do store this data, and then I just display it on the display. If I do talk about it like this, it really doesn't sound like that much, but for me it was quite nice to actually dive into it and create my own ESP IDF project. Because sure, I mean I did a couple of things for the Bitaxe and the Bitaxe firmware, but I was not really that into the ESP IDF, and it's really good to get into it and get used to it, because it's needed if you want to understand what you're working on and what you're trying to actually change, improve, or whatever. So even though that I'm talking about some things that I'm doing here, I highly encourage everybody of you, if you want to dive into this, maybe you have a cool idea and you think this is worth trying out, do it. If you have no experience in coding, just share it. Maybe you find someone who you can explain it to, and someone is willing to spend a little bit of time on it and work on it with you. It's this community here is about all of that we just share the thoughts that we do have and make the planet better, right? Bullseye is writing red notification if your miners get hot. That's a good point. What I do think might be a little bit difficult would be to actually point out which miner would it be, because I could add in a threshold and then just point to the RP of the specific miner. Maybe I'll write those things down. It's good to hear from you. A little bit of critique is always good. I always need a little bit of input. I'll write those things down. Alrighty. So to be honest, from my side, we're only sitting here at 47 minutes. I don't really have any more topics to talk about today. So this is probably the shortest town hall that we ever had. Unless you guys actually want to talk about anything. I'm not sure. MacFighter, do you have anything you want to share or talk about?
No, I can't think of anything.
I mean, it's good. So we we don't really have anything to share, because things are brewing, things are working. We will see, hopefully, the first official release candidate for the Bitaxe Hex in the next 1 to 2 weeks. That's good. And then probably more manufacturers will hop on the Bitaxe Hex and actually produce them. Because, oh man, maybe we do have something. I am not pissed, but a little bit angry about the ignorance of a couple of people shitposting on the internet. And I don't take this personal, but the stupidity on X and other social platforms is just insane. People are posting about the Bitaxe is insignificant. That's one thing. And in the last town hall, we already spoke about why one Bitaxe might be insignificant, but in the overall term, this project is driving forward and is creating a movement for the overall mining scene. But now with the price point, and to be specific here, with Tiny Chip Hub being the first producer to actually release the Bitaxe Hex as a product you can buy at a price tag of like $3.99 without any enclosure, and a couple bucks more with an enclosure, whatever. It's interesting that people are shitposting about the prices and that they're way too high, because we do have competitors in this market with the Avalon Nano 3 or whatever this device was called, sitting at $100 with the Kickstarter, this was an insane price point to actually get out in the market and sell this. I was questioning if these guys even make the buck off of it, because $100 for, I'm not sure, McFarlane, do you know this, how much hash rate they had, like 3 terahash or 2? I'm not sure.
No, I don't know how much they're getting out of their device, but I expect the prices will start out a little bit high, and as the manufacturers start cranking these out, the prices will come down. So just be patient.
Yeah, for the hacks, definitely. I mean, that's always the case. I mean, we've seen it, and I was really shit-talking a little bit about manufacturers in the early stages of the Bitaxe era, where a couple of these stores were selling Bitaxe devices for like $300 or $250, and I mean, you can't really do anything about it. If people buy it at this price point, it is what it is, and they will keep the price high. But now we're sitting in an area where Bitaxe devices are being sold for $120, which is good, because it's the price point that we need for more adoption in the overall network. Winworks is running 4 terahash on the Nano 3. Interesting. Yeah, I think this will actually conclude my take on why I do think there's so much stupidity in it, especially with people don't really getting it, what we're doing here with this work on open source and changing the mind of how we actually approach a miner. Specifically, what I do think is really interesting in the last 12 months, or I think it's only 10 months that I've been here in the Bitaxe community, it's quite interesting to see that more and more of these newspapers and people on X and other social platforms are diving into the section of OPSEC and a little bit of what's the best wording for it if you don't trust someone? So basically what I'm trying to say here is we've seen more and more people coming on and telling about that they don't actually trust these big ASIC manufacturers, which is kind of interesting, because we've seen, for example, Bitmain in previous releases with their end miners building in software which is kind of bummer. Like, for example, their remote feature to actually deactivate your miner, which is lately no longer in their firmware, as far as we can tell, or as far as I do know. But just having this in the firmware is kind of insane. As well as the most recent news about that the Antminer clean job is completely different from all these other firmware devices that have been used for mining. If you're not sure what I'm talking about here, I'm trying to talk about the empty blocks that are getting produced, and with a 99% chance empty blocks are produced by Antminers and not by any other manufacturers, which is kind of interesting. Let's see. Alex Royce wrote, can you share the most common questions, misconceptions, shit posts I am looking for a project to write about? I could write a blog post about addressing these misconceptions. That's funny. Yeah, I mean, there are plenty on X. Just a couple hours ago, Scott was answering to an X post of someone who was basically also diving into the section of that the Bitaxe device is just way too expensive and doesn't make sense to run and stuff like this. I mean, sure, if someone is asking me and asking me, be honest, tell me, does it make sense to buy Bitaxe? It's kind of hard to tell, because I'm not the one who's making the decision to spend your money. That's the first point. And on the second, it's some sort of a personal opinion. If you actually want to have the right about your own device that you do use and all the control about it, because with what we're doing here, you could potentially learn all the software, you could potentially learn all the electronics, and then understand what we're doing here if you have no idea or no knowledge about electronics and software in general. Maybe you do, and then you can understand it even in a lighter way, which is brilliant. But if you're taking a look on Antminer, Brains, and so on, all these software and hardware things out there, they have nothing. So we are the only source, basically, besides from hopefully Block releasing soon some of their hardware that they're working on. But we, as this community, are currently the only one in this mining scene which is actually providing knowledge bases to the broader community. So we have never seen this from any other manufacturer before, which is kind of insane if you're thinking about it. Yeah, I think we will get to this 1 hour for the town hall. I don't know, what kind of take do you have on this, McFire, if I maybe involve you in this?
I tend to avoid a lot of the controversy and just focus on my own projects.
The right answer. I mean, sure, it's kind of hard. You don't want to piss someone, right? You don't want to piss someone off because in the end, sure, we are not 100% open source, because what we did is we used ASIC, or we are using ASIC chips from Bitmain, which are in particular not open source. We just reverse engineered them to a certain point where we can actually use them. But I mean, you need to start somewhere, and it could be potentially a risk for some manufacturers in the future if this overall open source scene becomes too big for them. Because currently we are small, we're really tiny compared to the market share of Bitmain and all the other ones. But think about it, if we had, for example, like 10 million Bitaxe devices running globally, this will be a huge market for them, and they're not making a buck out of it. I mean, I'm not saying anything, but it could be that in the future things will be a little bit darker, maybe a little bit brighter. I do have high hopes for Block and the open source ASIC that they're coming up with. So we'll see how this turns out to be.
Yeah, so there's a potential there through Block. I think it's pretty difficult for these manufacturers to prevent access to the ASICs, because you can always just buy one of their miners and remove them.
Correct.
Desolder them from the boards. The only way that they could really prevent this is if they change the ASIC and somehow encrypt the communications, or do something that makes it impossible to talk to it with open source software. But that's a lot of effort, and I think I don't see them doing that anytime soon.
Yeah, me neither. And even if they would do, that's my take on this, even if they would do this somewhere in the future, there are millions of chips out already. It would take years to come up to the point where there are no longer any chips available.
Yep.
Alrighty. Yeah, so Chilling Bee is asking what's the plan for the next video. Yeah, this week I didn't release any Bitaxe 101 series video, but next week I will, because I got plenty of questions about actually creating a factory binary file, so I'll probably make a video about that, as well as I do have, it's funny, I do have one wallet here next to me that I still need to review, where you just use a hammer and some sort of a stamp to actually write down your passphrase or your seed phrase for your wallet. I also need to do that. And other than that, I'd love to do a couple more live streams about sniffing Antminers. I really need to talk to Scott and Jonathan from Decentral to make something happen there. But, you know, people are busy. Takes time. Goody. I'm quickly waiting for Calsto to write something in the chat, and we'll see. After that, maybe we close today's town hall. I mean, as I said, if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them. town halls are usually not only a newspaper stuff, but more for the general good of asking and getting instant answers to whatever you might have questions about. Yeah, Calsto, lovely to be here, and lovely to have you here in this community. It's always good to have new people in here. Alex Royce is writing also something. And after that, then I'll drop my questions. All right, sounds good. Okay, guys, so then that's it for today's Town Hall, I'd say. Thanks, everybody, for joining in here. Thanks to everyone who's listening to this later on. And if you do not know, the Bitaxe Town Halls are available at YouTube, at Spotify, Apple Podcast, and lately also on Fountain. So feel free to listen to this on any of these platforms you'd like. And till then, see you next time. Thanks for being here. Thanks, McFider, for coming on the stage. It was lovely to have you here.
Yeah, you're welcome.